Hi, everybody. This is Professor Million, or Mills Hills, and I am the AI anthropologist. And today I want to talk a little bit about what I'm describing as the AI transplant, why your corporate body rejects agentic and other AI architectures and interventions. I think we all know that every single week there's a new study that comes out from Gartner or somewhere else, other leading consultancies that say that basically the same thing that data leaders have said for many quarters now, and in end of year reports and so on. Up to 80% of advanced AI implementations are failing to deliver their promised return on investment. Obviously a huge number, and it's pretty much the same as it maps identically onto the rollouts of all sorts of other technologies over the decades. I've been familiar with the efforts of organizations in the private and public sector to modernize, optimize, and become more high performance and take friction out of workflows. The immediate reflex, of course, always at the C-suite level, is to treat this as an engineering issue or a technical failure of process alignment. But it's worse than that, actually. And as an academic who teaches at Aston Business School and other places, even the most prestigious academic researchers are falling into this trap as well. And I'm inspired to do this recording today because in March this year alone, the Harvard Business Review published an article entitled "The Last Mile: Problems Slowing AI Transformation" by Lakhani, Spatara, and Stav. And these authors, drawing their data from their Frontier Firm initiative at the globally renowned and amazing Harvard Business School, well, they correctly observe that corporations today are pilot-rich but transformation poor. So they describe at some length and in reasonably well-written prose a highly frustrating phenomenon where advanced tools exist merely as isolated islands of productivity. So, for example, and we've seen lots of examples of this. You can look at myriad presentations on YouTube. An autonomous AI agent might draft a highly complex corporate contract in a matter of seconds, only for that document to then sit around in a legacy manual legal review queue process for two weeks or more, because the firm's risk and governance frameworks haven't been redesigned for what we could call an agentic pace. Now, this observation is incredibly accurate, of course, but their diagnosis is fundamentally flawed, as is often the case with academics talking about real-world things. Mainstream theorists label these kind of bottlenecks of the inability of technology to be adopted and make meaningful changes as structural frictions and process debt. And their immediate prescription, of course, is for techno-functional leadership, re-architect workflows from the ground up. And they treat the entire issue, the entire blocker, as an operational re-engineering project where really the people are the problem. And this is also where the elite advisory space gets it wrong. Organizations are not engines. They're not a Swiss watch with a little bit of grit in it that just needs servicing and cleaning, bit of WD-40. It's not a configuration of mechanical gears where you can simply dismantle a broken gear. Maybe you've lost a tooth on a cog, optimize a process map and pop in an agentic workflow, and everything runs absolutely fantastically. When you view an intractable, which is what they are, behavioral, which is what they are, problems, which they certainly are, through this purely kind of mechanistic view that organizations are engines or complex mechanisms, the transformation strategy is compromised before it even leaves the boardroom, let alone gets into all the dreadful sorts of corporate communications which create problems and have done forever. So to truly understand what I would like to describe as socio-technical risk, we've really got to put aside all of the engineering terminology of this last mile implementation and look at a much more visceral biological reality of human organizations. And my thesis is that deploying hyper-advanced software architecture today, whether it's enterprise generative AI, LLMs, retrieval augmented generation, autonomous agentic orchestration, all those buzzwords of today, it's not a technology rollout at all. I would suggest a better analogy to use is that it's an invasive organ transplant into a patient who's not in the best of health, but a patient who's also very stressed, fearful, and anxious. So let's, for a second, if you'll indulge me, think deeply about the physiology of this process. So from my AI anthropologist perspective,
What we're doing is taking a pristine, highly efficient, fully tested, fully effective, if you like, high metabolism, healthy organ, which is this new generative agentic capability, and you're dropping it surgically, inserting it into a living, breathing human body, the corporate body, your corporate culture, and all of the shadow workflows, fragmented processes, and other things. Now, what do traditional technology consultants do? Well, I think we all know they focus exclusively on the organ, the AI bit. They test it in its controlled, sterile laboratory environment, the pilot phase. They may well, roll out the pilot to get more and more buy-in and usage and prove use cases in organizations. Now, disaggregated from the overall socio-technical system that the organ is being transplanted into, they can marvel and make many positive noises around the performance, the theoretical processing speed, the sort of KPIs and OKRs, which can now be achieved with this transplantation. So what do they do then? Well, they hook up all the digital arteries, the data veins, the capillaries of teamwork and processes and so on, and connect the APIs essentially, which are also some of those bits of connective tissue, sew up that incision and run away and claim a successful deployment. But what they've failed to do is really assess the baseline health of the patient on the table, on the operating table. And with so many organizations, even those which are at least superficially efficient, effective, and with highly engaged workforces, the reality is that quite often, if we're being brutally honest, the patient body, the corporate body, is pretty diseased, certainly resistant to the insult of having a new organ put in, even if they're pretty healthy. That's an issue for transplant surgeons and all to overcome. So we're really talking about a chronically diseased corporate body, and it doesn't therefore matter. In fact, it's probably disadvantageous to have this awesomely effective and healthy transplanted organ going in. The connections that energize, that feed, that sustain the organ will fail, and therefore and be rejected, therefore, and the body will rebel against this insult. And that then, we talk a lot about poisoning with AI and data injects and so on at the moment. Well, we're also talking about this failed implementation, this failed transplantation will cause further poison to future efforts, either to rebrigade this effort or indeed try different ones. A bad experience with an AI supported payroll or customer complaint handling process will therefore compromise significantly, even on top of the fact that 80% of these deployments generally fail or are suboptimal. It will also have effects on other ones. If you're a high frequency trader and people have had a bad experience from one deployment of a new piece of technology, that then is remembered in the corporate memory of this corporate body and will affect the later implementations. So you've got that sort of cascading or epidemic effect across the corporate body. So what does this disease corporate body actually look like if we run with this analogy? Well, it certainly isn't a lack of technical talent or the ability of individuals to execute or even adapt to change. And it isn't about poor data pipelines, although, of course, that merely accentuates and deepens the challenges. But actually, it's more than that. It's the accumulated scar tissue of the past decade or more of prior interventions, which really mean that your workforce, and indeed almost any organization's workforce, has been on the receiving end, has been subjected to a somewhat relentless, pretty exhausting parade of relatively poorly executed digital data and cultural transformation programs. So really, we can, to stretch the analogy a little, they've developed these kind of deep tissue, hardened psychological scars. They don't look at the autonomous agent that's coming in as an administrative relief. They see it through a lens of potentially profound existential anxiety, and they do worry about the quality of the support that the agent is providing, but they also worry about, on a personal level, role erasure, a loss of identity and a recognition of being professionals at what they do. Think back again to the legal contractual case study that I opened this brief presentation with, and a total loss of their personal autonomy, because they're perhaps being made to feel or allowed to feel that they're becoming slaves to a volume and velocity and style of work that AI agentic agents are imposing on them. So because these past software rollouts were pretty clumsy and generally ignored fundamental human behaviors in the workplace and elsewhere, where comms and engagement were very much a last-minute bolt-on and heroically underfunded and underinvested in at the very later stages of those rollouts, employees do and did exactly what any resilient biological organism does to survive. They manufactured, if you like, antibodies and shadow responses to prevent the benefits realization of these introductions of software. So they built, or were forced to build, or were persuaded to build highly elaborate, unmappable, and certainly unmapped, few attempts made, shadow workflows and workarounds. And these are really the covert, informal processes fueled by a kind of tribal knowledge between the elders, and then training the novices in a community in deeper levels of knowledge, hence the anthropology dimension, that live entirely outside the scrutiny, view, radar, desk of formal management at any level. And this keeps the business running despite the software and not because of it, but also has other effects in terms of stress, employee satisfaction, churn, adherence to corporate policies for data quality, data governance, cybersecurity, and many other things. So if we are going to be attempting to force this kind of hyper-transparent, high-performance agentic AI organ into a department that currently works because it relies on these fragile shadow workflows and particular loci of knowledge of how to get things done, which are outside of formal processes because the formal ones don't work, then you're connecting your technical architecture, the agentic orchestrated network or swarm of agents, for example. You're trying to connect that to, or bind it, stitch it into an official process that actually doesn't exist in reality. It's a reality we'd like to have, but we don't actually have, and we've forgotten that thing doesn't really exist. Excuse me. So the integration points, much like sewing in the transplanted organ, fail because the underlying human tissue is inflamed and has that scar tissue that makes the connection difficult anyway, but inflamed by distrust, fatigue, fear, anxiety, resentment, and many other emotions. And when that structural mismatch occurs, a corporate body's immune system essentially then triggers an immediate aggressive counterattack, which isn't just about managing process debt or overcoming an efficiency bottleneck, but it's actually a very active, possibly a bit like autoimmune disorders, where it kind of the response goes too far, but it's a rejection of this new tissue of behaviors, practices, data, and so on, which is being stitched into, connected to the existing corporate body. So then when it comes to actual human behaviors, middle management and those frontline operators, users of these systems, deploy psychological and other antibodies, if you like. They engage in malicious compliance, perhaps, where they over control how they engage with the agents, for example. They may starve the RAG pipeline of accurate organizational context. They may not share documents which enhance the training of those agents and so on. Or they quietly feed those models incomplete data because they've worked out just how to demonstrate that these AI augmented or dependent agents, the kind of kryptonite for them, and then they begin to poison or otherwise make suboptimal the models. And then when heavy interference from management begins to fade, they retreat in order to get their jobs done deeper into shadow workflows, and they may well become deeper and more shadowy. So the long story short here is that the corporate body completely rejects a transplanted organ at worst, and a slightly more optimistic perspective is that the intervention has very little effect. The more likely result is that it has a massive effect where ROI is absolutely destroyed, and there are negative effects of the implementation. The more optimistic one is there's no real effects and marginal gains perhaps, but still nothing like the true capability that those agents could unleash if harnessed correctly and appropriately to the corporate body. So in summary, we can say that these multi-million-dollar AI infrastructure programs are neutralized at best, or sometimes they kind of necrotize and rot and cause significant cultural damage, which is enduring and very, very difficult to repair. Kind of think of almost like sepsis in a system, really. And the leadership who haven't been able to access the appropriate levels of support then fall back on either critiquing the maturity of the models that are being used, so they criticize the fundamental technology or the capabilities of the vendor or an implementation team. So really, and this is my end message, is that in order to ensure that AI investments scale across the enterprise and deliver sustainable, enduring, replicable, scalable, reliable value, we really need to stop thinking about being software engineers, process re-engineering individuals, and orchestrators of some brave new world of sort of cyborgic employees working hand in hand with AI agents, but much more like immunologists working with the surgeon to make sure that the patient is as healthy and surgically receptive as possible, that we've fully prepared the site of the insertion of the transplanted organ, and that everything is lined up to ensure the success for that organ in the months and years, because we're investing for both short and long-term returns on that investment. And so if there are problems with the underlying tissue, which there usually are, there are shadow workflows, these need to be captured, and that isn't conventionally done because it requires a certain skill set, but it is very, very doable. I think the bottom line here is the situation is resolvable very simply, but not using the same kind of approaches which have got us to where we are, i.e. standard ADCAR and PROSHI and other approaches to change management, and just taking those off the shelf and thinking, okay, well, this isn't about a new invoicing process, it's about implementing an AI agent or orchestra of agents, but we're going to use the same approach. Well, that approach hasn't worked before, so why would it now? So stick around, and in my next video, I'm going to, as it were, pull back the curtain on why some standardized quantitative metrics and change fitness scales are endorsed by elite business schools are completely blind to this immunological crisis. And I'll provide you with some hints and tips about how we can all do better and reduce failures, challenges to our return on investment of the promises of AI. Thank you.